I was expected and told to be male-like. And so there was a mantra that I grew up with where my family members would constantly say to me, Heidi, don't be a dumb girl. And what that meant was don't be dumb and don't be a girl. And so what that actually, how that manifests itself is if I saw a spider and screamed, don't be a dumb girl. If I fell and scratched my knee and was going to cry, don't be a dumb girl. If I had to pee, if I had emotions, like anything that seemed weak or female-like I was told not to be that.
Hello and welcome back to Healing and Growing Hand in Hand podcast. I'm your host, Lisa Tickle, and our guest today is Heidi Yewman, and her bio is very interesting. So Heidi Yewman is dedicated to amplifying the voices of those who have endured life-changing trauma. A writer, filmmaker, and longtime advocate, she uses storytelling to explore the deep-seated shame, resilience, and transformation that comes from surviving violence. Her work is both profoundly personal and powerfully public, rooted in her own experiences as a survivor of childhood sexual and physical abuse. Her new memoir, Dumb Girl, a raw, unflinching look at the long road from trauma to healing, reflects her heart of her life's work to foster empathy, break silence, and create change. Heidi's commitment to trauma advocacy began in 1999 when her former teacher and basketball coach, Dave Sanders, was killed in the Columbine High School massacre. Since then, she has spent over 2 decades elevating the stories of those affected by gun violence and trauma, believing that honest conversations can lead to lasting solutions. Heidi, thank you for being here, and thank you for forgiving me for slaughtering your name.
Oh, thank you, Lisa. No, it's all good. Thank you. I'm so glad to be here.
Yeah, I'm really glad to have you here and to share your story. And so why don't you tell us a little about you and about your book?
Yeah, so I have worked in the gun violence prevention field for the past 26 years, and it all started actually right after the Columbine High School massacre. I had graduated from Columbine 13 years before that shooting, and Dave Sanders, the teacher who was killed, had been my basketball coach, and along with the 12 other students who were murdered. And I went back to his funeral. I was living out of the state at the time, and I remember sitting at his funeral where something shifted. I was looking at my former teachers and classmates who had red, swollen eyes from crying, and we were all in such shock. And I sat there and something shifted inside of me, and I decided to get involved in gun violence prevention. I wanted to do something to stop this kind of massacre, this kind of unnecessary pain from happening again. And so that's when I really vowed to get into gun violence prevention. And it was through that experience, the 26 years where I learned a lot, but what I discovered was it was the place where I found healing from a really traumatic and abusive childhood.
Interesting. Yeah, I'm really interested to hear that.
Yeah, it's not sort of a normal path, but I don't tend to be a normal path kind of person.
Me either. So much of my trauma healing has been different, to say the least.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So I grew up in a family with 3 brothers. It was a very, very male-oriented family. And I was expected and told to be male-like. And so there was a mantra that I grew up with where my family members would constantly say to me, Heidi, don't be a dumb girl. And what that meant was don't be dumb and don't be a girl. And so what that actually, how that manifests itself is if I saw a spider and screamed, don't be a dumb girl. Oh. If I fell and scratched my knee and was going to cry, don't be a dumb girl.
Oh.
If I had to pee, if I had emotions, like anything that seemed weak or female-like I was told not to be that. And so I got really engaged in sports because that was a a way to belong in this family,
Yeah.
and that was valued. It was, and I was very successful. I ended up playing volleyball in college on scholarship, and so I had some success with that for sure. But the when you get that message constantly throughout your life, you start to believe these messages, right? As I know that you're very aware of that in your own life. And so this one thing that happened in fifth grade, I had, so I'm 11, and I failed a social studies class. And my dad, who was very prone to anger and violence, he found out that I had failed I saw the F on my report card. And I had a really horrible night with him, very abusive, hitting, slapping,
Oh,
pushing, and it was terrible. But as terrible as it was, that night when he got done and he said, "I need you to go get all your F papers," and I had a bunch. I'd failed spelling and other tests, so I gathered them all, and he had me tape them onto my bedroom wall. And so I put all my papers, my F papers, up on my wall, and he said, "Now all your friends will see how stupid you are."
oh,
And Lisa, the way that affected me, I fell asleep and I woke up every morning to that wall. And it was this daily reminder that you're dumb and you aren't enough and you will never be enough. And so of course, my power was, okay, fine, I won't have friends over to my house. They'll never see this wall. But I protected myself in that way, but it certainly ingrained
oh,
into me
sure.
this feeling. And I mean, this was when I was 11. I'm 56 now. And I still believe that message.
Yep.
And it's so hard to unravel
Yes.
these messages. We totally believe them. And our brains are being wired at that
Yep.
age anyway. Our frontal cortex hasn't been developed. And so we believe it.
100%.
And
It becomes so deep
so
in
we go
us.
through life.
Sorry, it
Yeah.
becomes so deep in us because I was the same age when I got the one major belief in my life was that I was told nobody likes you. You know that mom and dad's friends don't like you, that nobody loves you, they don't like you. And so I remember, like when you were talking about when he did that and how it hit you, it was the same thing. It was like, it felt like somebody punched me in the chest because I was so devastated because I instantly believed him. Instantly. And it was devastating. And to this day, I still struggle with that belief.
Isn't it amazing the long shelf life that these things have? And the little things that we say to kids that
Yeah.
as adults we don't think it's a big deal. I mean, I don't think my dad even remembered saying that.
Yeah, yeah.
But I mean, and that message was worse than the beating I took that night.
Yes, it's so true. Those messages and those beliefs that we end up getting have the long-term effect on us more than the actual beating. I 100% agree with that.
Yeah, and that's why the title of my book is Dumb Girl, because it's this journey about me trying to unpack that and try and find. When I started in gun violence prevention, I didn't know how to start. I was passionate about this topic, but I didn't know how to start, where to start. I certainly didn't feel like I belonged.
Yeah.
I wasn't at Columbine. I didn't suffer the experience that the kids that were there experienced, but I felt this important passion to help stop this thing from happening. But I had to overcome my own insecurities and my what they talk about, the imposter syndrome.
Yes.
I mean, everyone has imposter syndrome, but I think when you're abused as a child, it's it's insane.
Oh, yeah.
It's so big.
It's over the top. Yeah, it fills you. It definitely. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it
Yeah,
stirs
so-
up that fear.
So the book is really about that and how I found my voice, how I found my power, how I found my confidence through doing this work. And I think it's so interesting coming out of this abusive family, and my dad was so angry all the time. And I was terrified as I became an adult. I avoid conflict as much as I possibly can. And I certainly avoid angry men. I freeze. I can't deal with it. But so I think it's ironic that I would go into this area of work that is filled
Yeah.
with like vitriol and conflict
Lots of
and
triggers.
I would go towards that. Yes, so many
So many
triggers, right?
triggers.
So I'm leading a protest and I've got guys with guns on their hips who are surrounding me and just screaming at me.
Oh,
And and so I really had to face my demons. I had to
yeah.
face my fears, right? Because I'm trying to avoid conflict. I'm trying to avoid angry men, but here I go into this field of work where I'm constantly around angry men, oh, with guns.
Right. They're stepping
And
right into
so
your face. Oh my goodness.
exactly.
Goodness.
If you're always waiting for something to go wrong, even when everything seems fine, that's not overthinking. That is trauma, and you are not alone. Our Women's Childhood Abuse Healing Workshop is a safe place for you to begin to understand what is going on and to begin your healing journey. Click below to sign up now.
So, so tell us on the journey. So I mean, you had the abuse with your father and the belief that you were dumb. How did you work yourself out of that? I know you said you're still
Yeah,
kind of
so it,
dealing with it, but like what was your steps? Because these beliefs, you're right, they go so deep and they feel like, for me, it feels like it's in my DNA. Like I have to always be
yeah.
aware of it. And because the thought will come up without me even thinking about it, like even bringing the thought forward, the thought will be there and I have to be aware of it and go, wait a minute. And then I have to start looking for evidence that proves otherwise.
Yeah. So I had I had a triple thing going on, right? So I had my dad who was abusive. I had my mom who was an alcoholic. So she's not really paying attention to what's going on. I also am a survivor of sibling sexual
I'm
abuse.
sorry.
And so it's multiple things that are happening. So I go into adulthood and I'm just reeling and I don't know what it all means. I'm recovering memories from the sexual abuse that I had repressed. And
Oh,
so this is coming. I'm flooded by it. I don't understand what it is. I don't
yeah.
understand how to stop it. So I'm really just in survival mode for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
And the way I started unpacking it, it started really with having my kids. And I felt like I have a son and a daughter and a husband who's we've been married now for 35 years. And he's been so helpful in
Oh,
providing this space for me that is, I'll thank him. I'll thank him for being so kind to me. And he's like, what are you talking about? Like, that's just a normal thing you're supposed to do.
yeah.
But as you know, you can't take these things for granted, right?
Mm-mm.
When someone doesn't hit you, you think, this is so great. No one's
Yes.
hitting me. This is
It's
amazing.
such a relief. It's just like,
Yeah.
I'm safe.
But we don't take these things for granted, do we?
Mm-mm. Mm-mm. No, no, no.
No.
I'm forever grateful for my husband. I call him my normal. And, it took me 3 tries
Oh,
to
I
get this.
love
Yeah,
that.
he really is because he didn't grow up in the trauma that I did at all. And sometimes for me, I talk about like I don't always know where the line is in the sand of like maybe a boundary or and that's so common with survivors because we had our boundaries stepped all over, so we didn't learn about boundaries. And sometimes I talk about this a lot that I just can't see that line in the sand and I won't know. Is there a line there? And I'll go to him and I'll explain to him kind of what's going on. I'm like, is that normal? Is my response normal? How would you
Ah,
respond to it? And he would tell me, and that has been such a huge help. Plus creating a very safe space for me.
that is so good because I think our nervous systems are so used to the abuse that then we get we get out of that original home and then we don't know how to turn off the survival
No.
skills and that survival mode. And
Mm-hmm.
it doesn't actually serve us very well once we're not in that space that's not safe. It oftentimes works against us.
For sure.
But but you had asked about how I sort of began the healing. And
Mm-hmm.
so it was my kids were young when the Columbine High School massacre happened. They were 1 and 4 at the time. and I really wanted to get involved in gun violence prevention, but I didn't know how. Like, you can't just call up an organization and say, I'm here.
Yeah.
Right. I have no skills, but I'm here. So I had heard about this campaign called the Asking Saves Kids campaign. And it's this campaign that encourages parents to ask if there's a gun in somebody's house before you let your kids play in their home, because it's a safety question. And so it's at the beginning when I heard about it, I was like, well, how are you going to ask this question? It feels like you're asking, hey, how much money do you make? Or some inappropriate question.
Yeah.
But what I learned is that it's really not about judgment about gun ownership. It has nothing to do with
Right.
that. It's about safety.
Right.
So when my kids were 1 and 4, they'd go to play dates. I'd take them over, and then I would ask about, what kind of dog is there? Is there a swimming pool? What kind of TV shows are the kids going to be watching? Who's supervising? So these are all safety questions, right? And so then on top of it, also, do you have any guns in your home that the kids could get into? And if you do have guns, are they locked up and the ammunition stored separately? And so it wasn't a tough question to ask. It was, if my kids were allergic to peanuts, I certainly wouldn't hesitate and say, oh, I don't, that's kind of embarrassing to ask the question about peanuts. And so I actually one time asked a friend, I said, hey, look, my son is not allergic to peanuts, but he's deathly allergic to guns.
Yes.
And, right. And so sometimes I would use humor in this question, but that's where I got my start. Is I went to my daughter's elementary school PTA president and said, can I talk to the PTA about this? So I go into a group of about 15 women and I tell them my experience learning about the Asking Saves Kids campaign. And then I talk about ways to ask this question. And so that's really how I started. And that gave me a little bit of confidence. I learned how to speak in public. If you call 10 women in a PTA, like in the elementary school lunchroom, if
I
that's
would say
public
it's a good
speaking,
start.
I suppose technically.
Yeah.
But yeah, so then it just kind of went from there, and I got more confidence, I got more experiences. Other PTAs found out about it, invited me in, and then I'm moving forward. And as I'm doing this work around gun violence prevention, I'm getting really frustrated with the conversations about this duality of either you're pro-gun or anti-gun, and so, or what statistics are correct, and which do we include suicides? I got in an argument with a guy who said you shouldn't include suicides because those people wanted to die anyway, and I thought that's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. If someone dies from suicide by gun, they're still dead.
Right.
And it's still tragic and people still miss them.
Right.
So anyway, I just got frustrated with these conversations. And so I became really interested in the stories. I wanted to know, how does a mom get out of bed the day after she finds out her child has been killed? I'm so grateful to not know that personal experience, but I have a lot of friends who have had this experience.
Oh,
and
God.
I'm still amazed. I'm amazed that they can do life.
I can't imagine. I just can't. Like, the tears started to well up in my eyes because I can't even go there. Like, even my grandchildren, I just can't even imagine how you do that. I mean, I thought I was strong. I don't know if I'm that strong. You wonder.
Right.
I don't want to find out.
Right. So I started interviewing people who had lost loved ones to gun violence, especially children. And I wrote a book that came out in 2009 called Beyond the Bullet. And it's about 19 people who lost a loved one to gun violence. And I tell their stories. And it was an incredible experience. And then I wanted to write another book because after the Sandy Hook shooting, Wayne LaPierre, who's the spokesperson at the time for the NRA, went on TV a couple days later and said the best way to stop a bad guy with a gun is a good guy with a gun. And so I struggled with that because I thought, well, okay, so what, you're the good guy with a gun, you saved the day, but then isn't there a cost to you? Like, doesn't that impact you?
Yes.
You just go and have dinner and then the rest of your life? And so I wanted to write a book, but I felt like it was going to be very nuanced. And so I partnered with an incredible filmmaker in my hometown, and we created this film. I directed and produced a documentary that's on Amazon called Behind the Bullet. And I interviewed 4 people who bought a gun for self-defense and then used it to shoot and kill somebody. And this one guy I interviewed, there was an intruder in his home. When he came home, they were in his house stealing stuff. He shot both of them. One of them died on his front lawn. And this was 3 years before I interviewed him. And he has nightmares. He has tripwires around his house. He's worried about this happening again. And his life is completely changed. And so there's a moral injury that happens when you shoot and kill somebody, even if the law says that you're justified, and even if it's in self-defense. And so, I told those stories. And what I found out, Lisa, is I was really good at telling people's stories, but I was ignoring my own. I was constantly digging into other people's trauma and other people's pain and finding out, how do you deal with this? How do you live with this? And even with that, the regret and the guilt and the shame around killing somebody else. And so, so I got to a point where I realized I need to tell my own story. I'm known for my gun violence prevention work and my storytelling, but I had this secret that I was keeping, and I was just so much shame around what had happened to me, with the sexual abuse, the physical abuse, the emotional abuse. And I think so many of us who've experienced this kind of abuse carry that shame. And we don't live in a society that really wants to hear all about that.
Exactly.
And I think we have to tell our stories because too many of us have experienced that, and only until we tell our stories do we start to come out from that blanket of shame.
100%. And there's a statistic out there that on average, women who are sexually abused is between the ages of 13 and 17. And they don't tell their story for 4 decades. And I know that to be true, not just in sexual abuse. I know that in working with women. I had one woman who hadn't told her story. She was in her 70s, and she didn't even tell her husband of 50-something years. There was so much deep, deep shame. And there's, I've said it before, when we hold those secrets inside of us, they have power. And once you speak them out, they lose some of their power.
Yeah, it's so true. When I was at a conference a conference up in Seattle, and a friend of mine who survived the Virginia Tech shooting, he was speaking and he was telling his story about survival and the tragedy that had unfolded there, and what it had done to him physically, being shot 4 times and surviving, and the loss of his friends. And so he was telling this story, and people were really interested in it, and they were leaning forward, and afterwards people were asking him questions. And it's this huge trauma that he's experienced, and it warrants the curiosity, and it warrants the leaning into, and what happened and how did that affect you. But when survivors of especially sexual abuse, childhood sexual abuse, that's a huge trauma. But I've noticed when I talk about it, no one's leaning in. No one's saying, "Oh my gosh, what happened?
Yeah.
How did you survive that? How does that impacted you?" There's a ew kind of factor. And I find it really interesting that certain traumas in our culture warrant sort of questions and exploration, and others are just like, I don't want to
talk
know about that.
Yeah.
And then what that does to us is it furthers the shame, and it furthers the aloneness of it. And so I think those of us who have experienced it, being in community with other people who've also experienced it, there's a feeling of camaraderie and like, oh, you get it. You get why I am the way I am.
Yeah, there's so much shame in that. And, and what I have found in the years that I've worked in this, in trauma, is that when we tell our stories, it opens the opportunity for us to connect with others. Because I know when I do the workshop, one of the first night, that's the only night that we talk about anything in our like trauma like that, our story per se. And we have the women just tell one real quick story, the first thing that comes to their mind. And when these women, when I used to do it in my home and I would watch them, there was just this incredible fear of them having to share, but they would. But by the end of the, like halfway through the stories, you can see the connection already. You can see the women kind of relaxing, like, I'm not in this alone. Like there's somebody else dealing with that because they haven't shared this ever. And so there's a connection. And by the end of the night, these women are connected. They're connected. It's magical.
That is true. And I think there's also this bravery in it, right?
Oh, yeah.
When someone tells their story, then you think, oh, I can tell mine. And so, we talked at the beginning of this conversation about this sort of strange path that I've been on, or different path. I guess we should
Yes.
frame it that way. But the Asking Saves Kids campaign was similar to that, where I would ask somebody, hey, do you have guns in your home? So my kids don't get into so that the kids are safe during this play date. And they would often say, oh my gosh, what a great question. No, I don't have any guns in my home, but oh my gosh, I've never thought to ask. I should start asking that. So it was this contagious thing. And so I'm finding that true to be with stories of abuse, childhood abuse, is telling your story often allows other people to have the bravery to tell their story.
Yes.
And on and on and on. And so I found it just interesting that I found these two things go hand in hand that seem very different.
Yes.
Healing is hard, but healing alone is even harder. If you're craving connection with women who get it, the Women's Healing Community is here for you. There's no judgment, only real conversations, healing tools, and a circle of support. Click below to sign up now.
So let me ask you this, because I know that working in this arena, I've done a lot of healing, but I'm on my healing journey till the end. And, I hear stories and I'm learning so much about trauma, and it can trigger me. And sometimes I need, I'm really careful about taking a break, and from it. So you are deep in it as well. And you're hearing some really horrific stories. And so you said that's about the time that you started to do your own healing journey, because you realized, oh, I haven't told my story. I would imagine that hearing those stories would have been so triggering. How did you manage that?
That's such an interesting question. So one of the things, and I write about this in my book, so one of the things about the don't be a dumb girl part was like, don't cry. So I got really good at learning how not to cry, right? Which is like in life, that's a bad thing.
That is.
But what happened is it allowed me, so I've found these superpowers that I have discovered about myself, where I've always had such shame about that. The ability to hold my emotions and not cry gave me the ability to interview people where I could ask them about tell me about the worst day of your life. And they could be crying, and they could, snot coming out of their nose, kind of crying. And I can like
shut it off,
compartmentalize and shut it off. And I do think a lot of abuse survivors experience this and can do that. But anyway, so I was able to do that. And so I was with a friend of mine who was my photographer when I was doing the book. And she was a big crier, right? Emotions on her sleeve all the time. And I said to her before we went into this interview, I said, look, I know you cry all the time. I said, but we have to be professional, and you can cry, but you can't cry more than the person telling us the story about their son being killed, right? And she's like, oh, right, yeah, that's kind of a good point. Yeah. I'm like, so keep it together just a little bit. So we go through the interview, and it was actually, we were interviewing one of the moms who lost, her daughter was killed at Columbine. It was very intense. I can feel myself absorbing her energy and her sadness and her grief, and which happened in every single interview I've ever done. And And I feel kind of an honor about that, like I'm lessening their grief.
Ooh.
But to your point, like you have to do something with it.
Yeah.
It can't live in you. And so we left this interview. I drove onto the highway and then got off at the next exit, and I pulled over and I said, Kathy, are you okay if I cry? And she
Aww.
goes, what are you talking about? And I said, I just feel like I need to cry. She said, of course you can cry. And so I started crying, and then she started crying because she easily cries. And then we're laughing that we're sitting in this car crying, and then we cry more. But anyway, what happened was I realized I have to let go of this energy that I've just absorbed. I'm never going to lose all of it, but it's an important mental thing. And we talked about it after, and she said, why did you ask me that? And I said, well, I thought you would think I was a dumb girl if I was crying. And she said, no, of course I wouldn't think that. But that was what my brain was telling me, and that it was risky to cry.
Yes.
And I didn't want her to think less of me. So that was the practice. Every single interview from that day forward, we would get in the car, we'd drive a couple blocks away, pull over, and cry.
Oh.
And it was an incredible experience because it really helped me take care of myself, and I felt like it was a way of honoring the people,
Yeah.
because it really wasn't professional for me to be crying as much as them.
Yeah.
But it needed to be released, and I think that's part of it. And I'm sure the work you do, especially on the podcast, I'm sure the things you hear, you have to release it.
I have heard some horrific stories in the workshop. And I remember, because I took the original workshop that I took was through a church, and I took it many years ago. And I was a mess in the workshop, listening to all the other women tell their stories. And there was like 25 of us in the group, so it was pretty big. And I was just a hot mess when I left there. I was crying the whole night, right? And didn't sleep that night when I got home, because I'm visual, so I'm visualizing all this stuff. And of course, I'm also thinking, as I'm hearing these other stories, well, these people have it much worse than me, and so a few years.
Yeah, why do we do that? Why do we compare?
I know.
I
it's
mean,
like, oh, their story's much worse. What
isn't
am I
it
crying about? No. But
Right.
about a few years later, the woman that headed up the workshop and created it reached out to me and a friend and asked us to take it over. She was going to retire. And one of the conversations we had, because both of us are empaths and both of us can cry easy, is how the heck are we going to get through the first night hearing these women's stories and not crying? I can't cry for you and not cry for you. I can't cry. Like you said, somebody's got to have it together for these women and be the strong one.
Right,
And I'm like,
yeah.
how are we going to do this? And I will tell you, I did that particular workshop for 8 years, and not one time did I cry. Now, I will say this. I didn't sleep that night. Didn't sleep at all.
Yeah.
And had to release it myself the same way and cry and all that. But you're right. I think we do actually learn. And I'm so emotional. I can cry pretty easily, but I can shut it off. But when I look back, when I had been at the beginning of my healing, I completely shut that down. That was a weakness in my eyes. And I was afraid if I started crying, I wouldn't stop.
Well, it's interesting because then I learned this thing, right? Like, I've got to get it out. I need to cry. And it was really helpful. And then when I was doing the film, I had two cameramen that flew all over the country with me as we filmed people asking about when they shot and killed somebody. So one of the stories is a family in North Carolina. The 8-year-old son found the mom's gun and accidentally killed his 5-year-old little brother.
God.
And so we flew out to film and talk to this family, and it was 10 years after the shooting, so they had some time to reflect on what had happened. So the boy was now 18. But I remember coming away from the interview, and it was, again, just so tragic, and listening to this 18-year-old boy explain what he had been through, and the tragedy of it, and the guilt and the shame, and there's no help group that you can go to for that kind of thing. So we pull out and we pull away, and I said to my two cameramen who were guys, and I said, "Hey, do you guys want me to like pull over in a couple miles and we can cry?" They looked at me like I was insane. And they were like, "Wait, what? No, we're good." And I was like,
well, I
"Oh,
need a
dude,
minute."
Okay. Right. So I was like, okay, this is going to be a hotel Heidi by herself in her hotel room situation. But so it got delayed, but it was still a part of my process. And it was honestly, it was kind of a bummer that we couldn't do that together, because when Kathy and I did it, my photographer, it was so helpful. And it was this really cool bonding moment. And then
Yeah.
every time we would laugh before we would do it, right? But it was just kind of a bummer that I couldn't do this with these guys. And I think we're seeing that in our culture too, right? This men not being able to, this hyper like masculinity, and
Yeah.
men not really being able to take care of their emotional needs, because if I'm feeling like I can't cry because of my upbringing and being tough and not being girly, then like what are guys going to do,
Yeah.
right? And it's too bad is what it is.
Yeah, we've really done a disservice to our boys. I mean, we've really, this thing of sucking it up, buttercup, don't cry, and rub some dirt on it, you're fine, and, be angry.
Yeah.
And yeah, we've really done a disservice. It's interesting. I had, when I went to counseling one time with my ex-husband, I had a counselor one time say to me, men and women have the same emotions. We have the same emotions.
Oh yeah.
Men just aren't allowed to
Right.
show them, except for anger, but we all have the same emotions. We all feel the same emotions, and we need to release those emotions. And that's one thing that's, I'm so glad you're sharing that, because, about, having to pull over and cry and release this, because I can't even imagine, and it's funny because I did the same thing with the workshop, to release it. And I didn't even realize that's until really kind of now that's what I was really kind of doing. But, that's something in the trauma arena that I have thought about too, is like, we don't stop and think about the effects of that police officer that had to shoot that person. And what he or she
Right.
had to live with as a result. They didn't want to do that. And I'll tell you, I had my own experience. And so I remember I was like 20, 21 years old, and I worked downtown San Diego. And at the time, it was dangerous down there. It was very dangerous. And my company had sent me on an errand kind of in the afternoon. And so as I was walking down to my car, and I had to walk a couple blocks, I crossed the street, and I had noticed this guy sitting on the bench. And as I got up to walk to my car, I noticed he got up and he started to follow me. And I walked by a building that had a mirror, and I look and I could see he's following me. So I pick up my step. I get to my car. I get in the car. I'm fine. I got the car started, locked my door. And just as I look to see the other door, it's unlocked, and he opens the door. And everything slowed
Lisa.
down. Everything slowed down. And I remember thinking, oh my God, if this guy gets in the car, he's going to kill me. And he didn't say anything to me. And he kind of looked at me, and I could see that he had like this big welt on his head, and he didn't say anything to me. And I remembered at the moment that I had like a screwdriver between my seats. And I pulled it up, and I remember thinking this. To this day, I can take myself back to that spot, and I can feel everything about it. And that was, I knew that if he got into my car, I was going to have to stab him. And I'm dealing with, I don't want to do this. I don't want to do this, because the position that I was in, I couldn't have gotten out of my car fast enough. It's not one of those situations where I could have just gotten out of my car. I had to deal with this. And actually what I did is probably stupid, but it worked. I pulled it up, and I said, you get in my car, I'm going to stab you. And then there was nobody around too. And for some reason, he looked up over the hood of my car. I remember grabbing the door, slamming it shut, locking it, pulling out of there. I have no idea how I did not slam into all kinds of cars. I was completely calm until I was about 5 blocks away. And then my foot, I started shaking so bad I couldn't drive. But that moment of having to live with, I might have to kill this guy. It's him or me. That is
Yeah.
frightening. And I thank the good Lord every day that he didn't get in my car.
Wow, your survival instincts just really kicked in, didn't
Yeah,
they?
it was
Right?
weird because everything slowed down and everything became crystal clear for me. And so it wasn't a great experience, but at the same time, it was an experience that I learned that, well, I can't take care of myself. Like I have that ability. If I get myself into a really bad situation, I can get myself out, hopefully.
Yeah, and what a gift, right? Like you certainly wouldn't want that experience and you wouldn't wish that upon yourself, but this gift to be able to know, like, yeah, in a thing like this, because we sometimes trying to imagine what would I do, what would I
Yeah.
do, but until you experience it, and like that's incredible that you were able to do what you needed to do to survive and get out of that situation.
You know, and
That's a really great story.
yeah, and it sticks with me. I mean, when I tell that story, I can remember
I bet.
every single detail. And you know, what was interesting, is I got back to the office. I went and did the errand. I followed through and I came back and I parked in the same spot and I looked around. He wasn't around. And when I got up there and I told him about, they thought it was hysterical. They thought it was hysterical. And I looked at him and said, don't you ever send me on another errand again. And my point to that is, you know, when we're abused as children, sometimes our abuse goes through our even into our adult life. And I had a lot of experiences with abuse at work. And that was one of them.
Yeah, I think that's a common experience. I don't know what that's about, but yeah, I agree.
Yeah. So tell us more. You have some interesting stories.
Yeah. So, as you were telling the story about that, so another thing that I did with the gun violence prevention, as I had mentioned, I was doing these protests and vigils, and I was talking about the Asking Saves Kids campaign, like at press events and this kinds of thing in parks. And what I was noticing is all these guys kept showing up to my events with guns on their hips, and so I thought, what's that about?
Yeah.
Like, we're in this park, it's in the middle of the day. I feel relatively safe. So why are these guys carrying concealed weapons or openly carrying firearms? What do they know that I don't know? And so one of the things that I did when I was being abused by my dad, somehow I was really curious about his childhood and his upbringing. And I wanted to know, like, why is he acting like this? I mean, I certainly thought it was my fault because that's like how it works
Yeah.
when you're abused is you internalize it and think, oh, it's because I'm not a good person. But I also knew there was something inside of me that knew, like, what's his deal? Why is he like this? Why is he so prone to anger? And so when he wasn't angry, I would ask him all kinds of questions about his upbringing and this kind of thing. And so that continued throughout my adulthood, where these guys would come to my event and I was just curious about, why are they like this?
Yeah.
Why are they carrying, why don't they feel safe? And so what I decided to do was, I want to find this out. And the only way I can find this out is to experience what they're experiencing. So I was living in the state of Washington and I got a permit to carry a concealed weapon. And then I went and bought a firearm. Now, in the state of Washington at the time, you didn't need to know anything about guns to get a permit.
Goodness.
You didn't have to take any kind of safety training whatsoever. And this is actually pretty common around the country.
Oh.
It's state by state are the laws. So some states you don't even need to get a permit anymore. And then some states you need quite a bit of permitting and you need to have a purpose for the gun.
And there's
But
limits
anyway,
on the guns you
so
can have.
exactly. But mostly there's not, and they're getting, the gun laws and the regulations are getting less and less. So anyway, so I bought a gun and then I wrote a 4-part series for Ms. Magazine called My Month with a Gun. So I bought this gun and for a month I carried it with me everywhere I went. And then I wrote about it because I wanted to know, how is it going to affect me physically, emotionally, and psychologically? And so I wrote about what it was like to have the gun at home, how I stored it. I wrote about what it was like to have it when I'm out and about. So I took it with me to yoga class. I had it either in my purse or on my hip when I went to yoga class, when I went to grocery store, when I went to church, when I was running errands, to the bank. Yes, you can carry a concealed weapon into a bank. it legally, and I didn't. That shocked me, because the other thing is I didn't want to break any
Yeah.
laws, so I couldn't pick my kids up from school with my gun with me, because you can't have a gun
Yeah.
on a at the school. So anyway, and what happened was, what I didn't anticipate is how paranoid it would make me. And so
Oh, yeah.
I would go to the grocery store, and I'm like, okay, where's the vegetables? What's on my list? But I would be thinking about, oh, who else is carrying? And I'm looking at people's hips and trying to see who else is carrying.
Oh,
And then at night, my son was in middle school. My husband was traveling, and I go to bed at night, and usually as a mom, I would go to sleep and I'm thinking mom thoughts, right? Like, oh, I need to go get something, like I need to get something for dinner tomorrow. I forgot to pay this bill. My son's science project is due in 2 days. I'd better get on him about it. Those kinds of things. Well, those got hijacked. And all I was thinking about was, okay, if I hear the front door open or a glass break, then someone's in the house. So I will go to the safe, get the gun, and then they'll probably come up the stairs, and then I'll hide behind the door, and then I'll shoot him. But oh my gosh, if I shoot him, then they're going to die on the landing, and it's probably going to wake up my son, and then he's going to hear it, and then he's going to see a dead body in my house, and then we're going to have to move because he'll have nightmares.
sounds like me.
And I'm just going
Yeah.
crazy in my head. And so I'm not being productive in my thinking. I'm paranoid. And I had the gun for a month, and then I was so glad to get rid of it. I had it melted down so it couldn't ever be used. And but it really gave me an insight into people who carry concealed weapons. And I don't think they're bad people.
No.
And I think that there is fear. Not everyone lives in safe neighborhoods, but I got a better understanding, and I was more empathetic for the people I was arguing with
I love that.
about gun violence, because I didn't like having enemies. I
Yeah.
didn't like not liking these people. It's like we can find common ground, but I can't do it if I'm judging you and thinking and othering you. And so there was constantly this feeling of othering
Yeah.
them. And so
Us and them.
I became curious. And so I get that sort of feeling now of, oh, that's hard to be in that kind of state and mentality. Now, I don't know the solution for how you get out of that mentality. And I'm sure if you would have experienced what you experienced, and he would have gotten in the car and God knows what happens, then maybe you have a different feeling about your own safety. And so I'm willing to be in that mindset as well. But I think if we can be a little bit more empathetic to people who we sort of, I'm using air quotes for people who are listening, but who are oppose us and have opposing viewpoints. I think all of us we just have a lot of pain, and everyone's trying to get through life the best way they can. Some people make different decisions than what we would, but I think, that's really what I try and do. I try and tell other people's stories. I try and have empathy for people who are like me and people who aren't like me, because at the end of the day, like, we're all in this thing called life.
Yeah, that is a beautiful story. And what you just showed, and everybody needs to do this, is we need to be curious. Instead of being judgmental, you took judgment and you set it aside and you're like, I'm curious. And really, curiosity is one of the key components for our healing as well.
I would agree.
Instead of being judgmental, even with ourselves especially, right? Instead of just dismissing yourself on something, like if I make a mistake, I used to be like, oh, you're so stupid, and just dismiss it and move on, and instead of doing that, it's like, we need to be curious. We need to use curiosity. And because you did that, you were able to have an understanding of what these guys are going through and what they're thinking. And it gave you
Yeah.
empathy, where before you were like, I don't understand what's going on. Where other people are probably like, what a jerk. Why are they doing that? And instead you're being curious. And that is such a key component. That's such a beautiful story, because we are, especially right now, there's just us and them, and there's this big
It's
line.
so polar. We're set in a polarized
Gosh,
world
it's
right now, aren't
awful.
we?
It's awful. And we're so mean to one another. And this is kind of the same, along the same lines. And I've shared this on my podcast before, and this is really key to the healing. Like, I used to have so much anger towards my mom. And what the biggest anger was, why the hell didn't you stop this? Like, why the hell didn't you change? Like, why weren't you the cycle breaker? Why am I the cycle breaker? Why weren't you the cycle breaker? Right. And I just had this, it was really kind of a one-dimensional anger towards her. I wasn't open to anything else. And a few years ago, I lost my mom when I was 16. So there's a lot of things I don't know about her. There's a little bit I know about her past, but I didn't know a lot. And so we were on Ancestry, and we figured out, a friend of mine and I, in doing the research that we did on my mother, is that my mom had a horrific childhood. Her mother married and had a lot of men in her life. My grandma was a hussy, and she even had children out of wedlock and gave them up for adoption. So, and how I noticed this is, like, my mom had all these different last names. I thought, well, that's kind of weird on the census records. Like, you'd see the census records, and I'd find her, and it'd be
Oh,
another
yeah.
last name. Well, when her mom would get married, she would just change my mom's last name. And then I saw at one point my mom was living with her grandmother. So you can imagine the chaos. And the minute that all came together, that judgment disappeared. And I had such empathy for my mom. And I then had understanding of why she did what she did. It doesn't make it okay at all. It doesn't make it okay. And she's got to answer to that, right? But it took so much of that anger away. It gave me that moment of, oh, I get it. I totally understand.
Yeah. No, and I think that is so true, that's where we find forgiveness for ourselves and grace for ourselves and for others. Yeah, I know, like, I was motivated similarly when I did the film, where I was arguing with people who were saying we need guns for self-defense, and so I can be the good guy with the gun. And it was that same feeling of, I want to understand this, but I couldn't do the experiential thing, like my month with the gun,
Yeah.
with the taking a life.
Yeah.
Would have to interview other
Yeah.
people.
Yeah.
Yeah, so anyway, but yeah, and that the guy I told you about who killed the intruder in his house, very much a stereotype guy. He had guns all over, Fox News on. He and his wife both carried concealed weapons, even when they were like making dinner and chopping wood and fixing the car. But my experience with him and them was like a exercise in empathy
Yeah.
and an understanding of, okay, they live a very different life than I do, but man, my heart just broke for him with the effects of killing somebody. And in fact, he told me how neighbors would see him, and this was 3 years after the incident. They would say to him, "Hey, Kevin, did you kill anybody
Oh.
today?" And just how hard that was for him to hear. And he felt his friends leave him because of this thing he had done.
Oh.
Again, the state said, yeah, you're completely justified. We're not arresting you. We're not charging you. But boy, he was in his own kind of prison.
Yeah, we don't think about the aftermath, and like I said
No,
earlier, like,
and it certainly isn't on TV
No.
shows, right? Someone's like, make my day, and they kill someone, and everyone's like, yeah, you killed the bad
Yeah.
guy. But there's a long-term effect to that,
Well,
and it's
we're
not addressed.
no, and we're we watch the movies, we watch the movies that have the gunfights in them, and we watch and kids are playing video games that are violent. And I have said that for years, that you are going to get desensitized to that. It's not going to be as intense. And then when something like this happens, it's like, oh God, I didn't see all this aftermath that happens with it, and what I have to live with. That man has to live with that for the rest of his life. And yes, he was justified in what he did. It's just like if I get in a car accident, or I hit someone and it's 100% not my fault. I still have to live with that. I still have to live with the fact that I got into an accident and took someone's life.
Hmm.
You still have to live with that aftermath, and there's still trauma there that you have to work through.
Yeah, yeah. And ultimately what I figured out was it's so interesting to me, all the gun violence stuff that I did. It was all in reaction to what I did or didn't, mostly didn't get as a child. So I felt like no one was ever curious about me. Like,
Yeah.
yeah, Heidi, you lost your coat, but why did you lose your coat? And how can I help you figure out where your coat
Mm-hmm.
is or whatever it is? And so that wasn't afforded to me. So I feel like I'm on the other side of it, trying to
Yes.
do to other people what I wished people would have done for me. I wish there was grace for me. I wish people were curious about why are you acting this way?
Yes.
And we weren't afforded that
Mm-mm.
as little
No,
girls.
we were judged, and really, you were absolutely told what kind of little girl you were to be. So everything about you got
That's so
shut down,
true.
and you became a robot. So it's beautiful because it's true. And like I think about, I was, as a little girl, I was curious, but then that got shut down, and I went into my adult life not being curious. As a matter of fact, I went into my adult life thinking that I should have known, because as a child, if I did a mistake or did something, well, you should have known that. You should have known that. So I went into my adult life like, I'm not going to ask questions, because then I really will look like the dumb girl, because I should know. I should know that answer. I should know
Yeah.
everything. And that is so overwhelming.
Well, and ultimately, like that was my saving grace as a kid was sports because um, what I loved about sports is there was a referee, there were rules, and there was somebody to enforce the rules,
Yes.
right? So in basketball, if you take more than 2 steps when you dribble, or somebody hits you when you're shooting the ball, then the referee calls the whistle and says, "Hey, you're not allowed to hit somebody when they're shooting." And
Yes.
so here's the consequence: they get 2 free shots. And I love that. Like I could follow the
Right.
rules and everyone else had to follow the rules, and if they didn't, and that certainly wasn't happening at home. I was trying to be the best girl I could
Yeah.
be, and I was trying to follow the rules, but the rules kept
Yes.
changing. And dad had a bad day at work, so he comes home and he's screaming or hitting, and I tried to contain him, and I
Yeah.
tried to be the good person and distract him, but there was no referee. And so I really loved that place
Hmm.
where I was safe in
Yeah.
sports.
Yeah, that's true. That is so true. That's a good point. I wonder how many other kids are thinking that too.
Yeah, and how many people are in sports for
For
that
that
for that
reason.
reason, right?
Yeah, for that reason. It's
Yeah.
like I used to go to all my friends' house because I didn't want to be at home. It was safer being over at a friend's
Boy,
house.
I get that. Yeah.
Yeah.
And do you still do that? Do you still
Yeah.
love being at other
Yeah.
people's homes?
Yeah, I do.
Isn't that
Yeah.
funny how that doesn't go
Yeah.
away?
I'm more comfortable these days having, of course, people over, but oh yeah, I'd rather go to your house in a heartbeat rather than have you over at mine. Yeah. And I didn't even realize that until recently. And I'm thinking, God, and how it came to me is in the summer, I live in, when I was growing up, I lived in one of the hottest parts of San Diego, and I had no air conditioning, no pool, and I had friends that had pools. And so I would hang out over there, and we would be in the pool from 10 in the morning till 10 at night. And then that's when it hit me. I went, oh yeah, I used to always love staying at friends' house and going over there, and now I know why. It's interesting, but yeah,
Yep.
yeah. This is so interesting. You've really kind of opened my eyes, and you took me to a deeper place on the thing about what happens to these people when, the police officers and stuff, when they get into these situations, and our
Mm.
paramedics, and they see, I mean, these guys see the worst of worst in people. We just don't pay them enough
Yeah,
money.
they do. And one of the things I do or have done in my town is I volunteer for this organization called Trauma Intervention
Ooh,
Program, and we go out with the firefighters and the police when there's been some kind of tragedy, and they're providing the sort of physical first aid, and we provide the
emotional.
emotional first aid. So we're dealing with the sister who just found out that her brother was killed,
Mm.
or the father who's found his child who had died of suicide. So that kind of thing. And so we deal with the emotional aspect while the police are doing the investigation or whatever it is. And I again had success with that because I could
Yeah.
compartmentalize and I could be with people on their worst day in the worst moment. Oftentimes it was a natural death waiting for the morgue to come and collect the body. But if I wasn't there, then the husband is sitting with his dead wife's body waiting. And so then we could talk about, their life together or
Yeah.
whatever, and that moment a little bit less
Yeah.
difficult. I don't know quite,
Yeah, I know what you're
but
saying.
but yeah, but I really enjoyed that work because it was such this intimacy with this complete stranger, where you're really slowing things down for them and helping them through this really difficult moment. These, whether it's lots of minutes or hours, until they get their own support
Yeah.
system, family members, church members, whoever there.
Oh, it's beautiful. What a great thing to do. I, yeah, I can't even imagine. I don't know how you do that.
But yeah, this work is all this work is so healing for me,
That's
and it's such a privilege. And yeah, I found sort of the
your
thing
passion.
that yeah, and that I can contribute to the world to make it better.
Yeah, I know because I'm sitting here thinking, I don't know if I could do that. If I could go and I would, I'm not saying I wouldn't. I don't know how well I would do with it, but we all have our thing. And because I've had friends say to me, like, I don't know how you work in this trauma arena. I'm like, I've lived it. I've lived it. Are you kidding me? And if I can help somebody else out, not live 40, 50 years of misery, I'm going to do that. I didn't have anybody there for me. I think that's what motivates me the most is the adults. And that's what I was thinking about here when you were talking about, you go and you help these people that right now they don't have anybody with them. And all the adults in my life failed me. They over and over and over when I was young. And I had to mourn my mother's death by myself. I had to deal with the trauma all by myself. And, and so, yeah, if we can somehow help somebody else, it does how can I say this? It doesn't make our situation better, but I don't know what I'm trying to say exactly. Just it's kind of like beauty from ashes, right? And paying it forward. And who wasn't there for me, I'm going to be there for someone else. I'm going to make up to somebody else for what I didn't get.
Yeah, I think that's true. But then also you have this thing where you have this experience with incredible trauma growing up. And I was talking to a friend of mine once who also had a lot of trauma growing up, and she said, I always have to be touching trauma. It's like it centers me. And I thought
Interesting.
that is so brilliant because that, trauma, and
Yeah.
you're experienced it with it, you've processed it. And so if you're touching it, then you're like centered. And
Interesting.
because I was kind of like, why am I like this? Why am I so drawn to
Yeah.
this tragedy and this trauma? And that really made sense to me when she said that. It's like, I always have to be touching trauma to feel centered.
Interesting. That's probably very true. I never even thought about that. I'm gonna have to wrap my head around that. That's interesting. But it's true. I mean, I'm in it every day. I try to take a break from it on the weekend.
Because you know it, you know it, like at a very cellular level, you understand trauma, and that when your brain was being formed, that's what you were experiencing.
And it's such a relief is that I'm always learning more and more about trauma with every podcast, with all the research I do. And there's something, and I've said it so many times on my podcast too, that knowledge is power. And what it's done so much for me is it's given me that space between me and my behavior and all the trauma. And because I would see my behavior, when I would be triggered and I would be horrified by it, but I couldn't stop it. And so as I learn, I'm like, oh, that's why I acted like that. Okay, that makes sense. And so the next time I would feel that rising up in me, I could go, wait a minute. So I think that's for me, that's what motivates me more and more to learn about trauma is to understand it and to get that information out there and to help myself as well.
Yeah, like you're looking for the different ending.
Yes, exactly. Those little shifts too. There's all those little shifts that happen in your healing that add up to really big shifts. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Heidi, thank you for sharing your story. And I've always got a question for my guests, and that is, what do you want to leave our listeners with?
So I think I'd love to leave your listeners with what I was talking about before, is this: there's room for understanding and grace for ourselves, certainly, and then also other people,
Yeah.
right? So when someone cuts you off in traffic, maybe don't flip them off, right?
You're in my car, aren't you?
Maybe I joke with my husband because there'll be some kind of aggressive driver and he'll like get really angry and I'll say to him, I'm always looking for the alternate narrative. And I'll say, well, maybe they have a cake in the car, or if they're driving really slowly in the left lane. But so I think if we just remember that everybody, if you scratch just below the surface, has pain.
Yeah.
And if we can allow grace for them, for ourselves, certainly, because the messages in our head can be so harsh. And so I really try and live that way, and I try and be curious and understand other people, and I think we can live in a better world if we do that. And it certainly is challenging right now in this polarized political place that we live in right now. So I'm not saying I'm succeeding at it, but I'm trying.
I'm trying.
Right, and that's all we can do is try and be our best selves and be graceful with ourselves and others.
That's a beautiful message, and it's so true. And I mean, really, the theme in this is be curious. Be curious. Take judgment and replace it with curiosity. And like I said, I had a friend that told me that about 4 years ago, and that was a game changer for me. I was like, wow, how interesting. Bring that little girl up in me and be curious again. Right?
Yeah, because you're in a safe place where you can be curious.
Right, exactly.
You're not in that protective. We can't be curious when we're just trying to survive.
That's true.
You weren't curious about the guy who was going to get in your car.
Not at all. Not at all. Not at all.
No. Nor should you be, right? Like
don't want to invite that. So, well, thank you so much, Heidi, for being here. This has been very interesting, and you've given me a lot of insight on stuff, as I always get from my guests. So thank you for doing that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I wanted to mention that if people are interested in my book, which is out in August of 2025, it's called Dumb Girl, and you can get all the information about that in my documentary and my other book on HeidiYewman.com. So it's HeidiYewman.com. And there's resources there and all the information. There's a 3-minute trailer about the book. So jump there and you can see all my social media stuff and get the information that you're looking for.
Well, thank you for saying that, because I forgot to ask you that. And I was going to say, we'll put all your contact information in the show notes so everybody will be able to get it. And
fantastic.
Yeah. And I am definitely watching your documentary. I got it written down here. I love documentaries. I'm a big documentary person.
Yeah, it's on Amazon. So yeah, check it out.
Okay, I will, definitely. Well, thank you so much. I appreciate it.